My name is Bond, James Bond. My instructions were implicit. I was to leave for Jamaica in 2 hours. License to kill.
"37 years ago, James Bond made the giant leap from the printed page to the British screen. Though Dr. No was produced by a Canadian, Harry Saltzman, and an American, Cubby Broccoli, the success of this film was to have a profound and lasting effect on the British film industry.
British films were tended to be a bit elitist up until this point that the James Bond films came along. Suddenly we had a series that appealed to everybody in the world.
They took this man who subsequently, funnily enough, made Bond in his own image. It wasn't particularly the Bond of the book. And I think that perhaps was the very thing that made Bond a worldwide phenomenon, because I think Sean was the first big attraction that we ever had in a worldwide sense.
Dr. No's American backers, United Artists, had initial doubts about Connery and the role. Doubts, too, about the development of this single film into a fully fledged series, but Saltzman and Broccoli steamed ahead. Saltzman was later to leave the series, but through the next 3 decades, the Broccoli family, including stepson Michael Wilson and daughter Barbara, would steer James Bond into the realms of legend.
President Kennedy's comments, of course, about James Bond being his favourite character and Ian Fleming being his favourite writer and the Bond books being his favourite books didn't do any harm. But I don't think that comment had been made before the film. Ian Fleming and I were cousins, so I heard a great deal over the years from Ian about Bond in general and the films in particular. And I think he was very pleased. He certainly had reason to be. I mean, his income went through the ceiling, and so did the films.
They built up a great loyalty amongst the viewers. Every time that gun barrel came up on the screen at the beginning of a James Bond film, and you heard the distinctive music, the audience would just sit in their seats and just sort of tremble with anticipation.
All I can say is that the people that said it was going to be a huge success were liars, because nobody knew. And I think it's quite amazing that they're still going through today. I can only say that timing, I think, at the time to come out with something like that, it had a bit of oomph and looked a bit more glossy and upmarket than it really was, because it was made for less than $1 million.
I think the Bond franchise is remarkable because it's 19. Bond 19 is the one I'm doing. It's been going 37 years. And it's managed to appeal to audiences through 4 decades and on into the millennium.
I want to see Valentin Sokovsky.
Impossible.
Vodka martini. Shaken, not stirred. Tell him James Bond is here. Now.
Times have changed, and we've changed with them. In The World Is Not Enough, Pierce Brosnan and director Michael Apted steer 007 into the ambiguities of a new millennium. But when James Bond first made his screen bow, back in that autumn of 1962, it was also into a Britain poised on the brink of great change.
This baseball game is being seen in Europe right now over the Telstar satellite.
Britain had finally left the austerity of the post-war years behind. The first colour supplements were rolling off the presses, targeting the spending power of that new phenomenon, the teenager. Every aspect of the popular culture was affected. As the first telecommunications satellite orbited the Earth, the Tornadoes topped the hit parade with Telstar. And it was on the very day that a Liverpool pop group called the Beatles recorded their first single, Love Me Do, that Dr. No was premiered in London.
It was this tremendous upheaval in the social world, the swinging 60s. The whole culture of the country started changing in fashion, in behavior, in music, in design. Everything started to change, and of course the film industry went along with it.
There was so much more testosterone around then,
because we were not pushed into national service. So as a consequence, you had all these kids who otherwise would have spent the age of 16 to 18 out of the picture, who there they were, now thrust upon the world. You had disposable income from 16 to 18. So there we were, all of us, thrust into an age of opportunity.
Clearly it was a whole new voice was coming into the English cinema. This was a big, colourful, sexy, international movie. I mean, it was taking England out of its parochialism, and yet it was using something that was indigenously English, an English book, an English character, English style, English humour, but it was clearly, although they may not have known it at the time, it was clearly going to be kind of the first international English film.
Oh, the things I do for England.
Nobody who was of any consequence would play in it. I mean, your David Nivens, your James Masons, who would have been pretty good for the part, they didn't see themselves playing in that kind of a film. They were slightly wrong, but they all turned it down. Sean was pretty unknown, really.
Cubby and Harry thought he was great. When they met him, they said they left the office, they looked out the window and he walked away down the street like a panther. And they said, boy, he's great. Look at the way he moves. And, you know, he had the right look about him. He was a bit rough, but they felt with Terence Young they could sort of work with him and take out the rough edges.
Nobody had ever made a film like that before. In essence, a sort of, it didn't send it up, but it was a kind of tongue-in-cheek. And if you saw the rushes, you'd probably think, oh, this is not very good. In fact, Cubby told me that he had a great friend who had a chain of cinemas in America. Cubby had a rough cut, and he showed it to his mate. The guy came out and he says, Cubby, this is unshowable, this film.
Harold Sakata, the 284-pound wrestling sensation from Hawaii, is heading for a new career. If he passes his screen test, he'll play a murderous muscle man in the new James Bond movie thriller, Goldfinger.
Colourful villains such as Oddjob helped give the series its individuality, as did the distinctively sleek and sexy opening titles. Combined with a cocktail of girls, guns and gadgets, they made fans of a whole generation. Pierce Brosnan, Robert Carlyle and Robbie Coltrane, the stars of The World Is Not Enough, were three who had no idea where their childhood enthusiasms would take them.
1964. I was just a boy, over from Ireland. First flick I see with my mum and dad, Putney High Street, Goldfinger. So, but didn't want to be James Bond. I had no desire to be James Bond, never even dreamt of being James Bond. I was just a lad who got intoxicated by the movies.
Well, I remember going to see the Bond films with my father in the 60s, you know, in the early 70s when Connery was the man, you know, so that kind of link between Scots and Connery and Bond is kind of fundamental, so yeah, I was a big fan of the movies.
I remember going to see Dr. No with my dad, and I can remember for a long time wearing black crew neck sweaters under Smooth and really, really wanting more than anything to be James Bond. I remember coming out of James Bond movies and walking down the streets like that and all that, you know.
Anybody from anywhere could understand the film, enjoy the film at a certain level, whether you were in Taiwan or Timbuktu or whatever. This was the British film industry taking its wings and flying.
By the time of You Only Live Twice, the first of 3 films to be directed by Lewis Gilbert, the series was established and had international audiences in a vice-like grip.
There is a definite shape to a James Bond movie. It's, you see him finishing up his last case, then you see the bad guy start his big caper to take over the world, then James Bond is brought on the case, he's given his weaponry, he has to change his identification. That's the end of Act 1. Act 2 is he goes to the strange world and he meets a woman. She's either his helper or she's an assassin. The woman leads him to the legitimate face of the evil empire.
There is generally 2 girls involved. There's always a baddie, a villain who also has a sidekick. There's also a second villain. They seem to be essential and to have these characters, and also the timing of when they appear in the film is very important.
One assassin he kills using one of his secret weapons. The second assassin, he uses the weapon that the assassin attacked him with. Then he infiltrates the legitimate face of the evil organization. Everything's going good, everything's going great. He finds out the secret plan, and just as he's about to do something about the secret plan, he's taken hostage and put into an easily escapable death situation.
One of the tricky things of directing a Bond film is that, you know, you can't parody it. You know, you can't make fun of it because A, you don't want to, and B, because they only work if the characters in it are inside the story, inside what they're supposed to be doing, and aren't nudging and winking their way through it.
I am familiar with how they go. I feel I could write a James Bond movie right now. I feel that it would be crappy, but I think I know the bones of that genre, that oeuvre, if you will, if you must, if you shall. And I...
But even a winning formula can have hidden snags. Sean Connery had insisted that You Only Live Twice would be his last outing as 007. Could the series do without the actor who'd created Bond in his own image?
It wouldn't matter if an unknown did it, because James Bond is the star, and it'd be quite interesting to see what happened to this new guy. But obviously he's got to be 35. He can't be 22, can he, or 23? And if he's unknown at 35 or 38 or even 40, why is he unknown at, why hasn't he done something that's brought him to the fore, you know? So it's really quite difficult.
Good morning. My name's Bond, James Bond.
If you think you know your Bond, think again. This one's different.
What worries you most about taking on a multi-million-dollar movie like this?
Being able to do it well. That's what I'm hoping to be able to do. I just hope that my inexperience won't show.
The difficulties became apparent when the producers cast a male model with no previous acting experience. As it turned out, George Lazenby's outing as 007 was to be a solo flight.
This never happened to the other fella.
Whoever you'd have put in there, he'd have been shot down because the public in those days weren't ready to accept another Bond. They couldn't handle it. On the same token, Roger was going to be welcomed with open arms because they'd already sacrificed one, so now we're going to like the next one.
I just remember Cubby and Harry being confident about recasting. Of course, they did bring Sean back for Diamonds Are Forever in 1970-71. But then it was felt that he really was not interested in pursuing any further, and so they went with Roger.
Roger, within the evolution of the films, made his part superbly and uniquely his own, and married his work with the way that the films were developing. I mean, he was right for the kind of films that were being made. They were being made in a more light-hearted, humorous and fantastical way.
Are you quite sure I can't persuade you to stay the night?
When one is in Egypt, one should delve deeply into its treasures.
What Roger's good at is light comedy, charm, very English, and so on and so forth. He was never going to be able to murder or kill somebody like Sean, because when he did it, you expected somebody to shout lunch, and the dead man would get up and push off to lunch, you know. But when Sean killed somebody, he was dead.
To accommodate The Spy Who Loved Me at his beloved Pinewood, Cubby Broccoli endowed the 007 stage, the largest in the world, which was opened by Prime Minister Harold Wilson. In the race to better themselves with each successive picture, the Bond producers were demanding more and more of their technicians. And it was this new technical excellence that focused the eyes of the filmmaking world on Britain.
Bond's set the standard for special effects. I mean, they started the big special effects genre movie in the 60s, which was followed on with the Star Wars movies, and it's grown from there.
I think Bond did create a whole new language, which, the rest of the world kind of had to catch up with.
What they've brought us and what they've brought the British film industry is the wonderment that a Spielberg or a Lucas or a Kubrick can say, wait a minute, these are the guys that made these very silly pictures, wonderfully silly, and yet they are the people who can make them.
They came over here from America over a very long period of time, many, many years, because they considered that we had the best technicians in the world for the kind of films that they wanted to make. They're still coming.
For a long time, they had the field to themselves. Then along came Spielberg, and with very big budgets, and all he did really was to copy the Bond formula with Harrison Ford and so on and so forth. But they didn't have that one big central character.
But James, I need you.
So does England.
I suppose if I'm remembered for anything, it would probably be the ski parachute jump in Spy Who Loved Me. It cost $250,000, 20 years ago, to actually do the one shot. If I'd come back without that shot, I think my career would have been over. The ski parachute jump was done in one take. Rick Sylvester, who was the stuntman involved, was a kind of small, bespectacled character, the last man you'd ever expect to be a stuntman. One thing we hadn't thought of was that we had to jettison the skis. We had to find a mechanism to get rid of his skis, because the skis act like a parachute and would invert him as he fell in free fall. So we worked out a couple of little toggles which the audience can't see, and Rick was told exactly how many seconds to count before he got rid of the skis. But what we hadn't thought about, of course, is that when he pulled his chute, he would slow up and the skis would catch up with him. And in fact, if you look at that film very closely, you'll see one ski strike the canopy. It could have been an absolute disaster.
What's tough about doing a Bond now is that, that we have to do action sequences that can compete against the best action sequences that the Americans are doing. But also, I have to compete against the great action scenes that Bond did. I say, well, let's do a skiing sequence. Well, we did skiing in Bond 5, Bond 9, Bond 13, Bond 14. I think, oh my God. But the point is that Bond, in a sense, was, a very big innovator.
Eventually, Timothy Dalton took over from Roger, and I think Timothy made a great success of it. He again made his own. He was his own man. He put his own style into the Fleming character, and I remember Timothy was very, very keen that he would get back to the original Fleming Bond.
It's a terrific part, and it's a part that given the right conditions that you should be able to have a damn good shot at doing and making work.
The premiere of the film is likely to be in aid of the Prince's Trust, and the royal couple wanted to know about all the stunts they will see in the finished film.
We have managed to keep on reinventing Bond. I think sometimes you lose some things along the way, but you find something else. With Roger, we found a lighter touch, more humor. With Timothy Dalton, a more serious approach. With Pierce, I think we found a note of vulnerability without showing weakness in the character. So with each new casting, I think there's an opportunity to reinvent the Bond character.
You were expecting someone else? First time round was like a mission itself. It was go out there, do it, don't screw it up, get through it, deal with all the kind of anxiety that goes with it. The second time was difficult because the script wasn't well founded, and so we were always playing catch up. This time, though, the third time, because of the success of the other two, you know, you come in with more confidence, more relaxation. You know what you're doing a bit more. You know what you want to do with it a little bit more.
By the time Pierce Brosnan was settled into the role, its fifth incumbent to date, Broccoli had effectively handed over the reins of production to stepson Michael Wilson and daughter Barbara. Then, in June 1996, Cubby Broccoli died at the age of 87.
Life has to go on, of course, but it says an awful lot for them that you can actually keep the whole character going and have such a huge turmoil and change in it.
He bestrode the English film industry like Putnam, someone like that, as one of the great producers, one of the great driving forces, but you hear nothing but respect and admiration and love for the guy, which was a big surprise to me, because you know, film producers are not really the sort of people you'd think are traditionally lovable or generous or public spirited or whatever, but you know, his shadow is across the whole film, and it's, you know, it's impressive.
I had an extraordinary experience once in the Dominican Republic, and I was there with Cubby, and it was a Sunday morning, and we went for, and Cubby's very religious, and we went for a walk, and there was a lot of people gathered in this street, and I said to Cubby, it's very interesting in Catholic countries how the churches are full to overflowing, whereas in England we don't tend to have that sort of thing. We got closer, and they were playing The Spy Who Loved Me.
People ask me the question why these films work, and you try to figure out why they do work, and it's because the audience knows what to expect. It's become tradition, it's formula, and one hopes bloody great fun.
Well, everything in life is finite, so the Bonds will come to an end sometime. At least this sort of current series. But I think a fictitious character like James Bond always has potential. People will find always ways to reinvent the character.
No, I can't see an end, really. No, I can't see an end. I don't know what, I mean, all matter has an ending, but when that will be, I wouldn't like to guess. All I could say is that I wish I had it.
They have a special word, and the word is Bond. That will last for as long as time is imaginable. And you'll be watching Bond for as long as the film image appears to anybody on screen.